Hey, I'm Anthony Romano, and this video is going to be very quickly telling you why you should start training bodybuilding style like golden era bodybuilders did. Basically, there's a couple key reasons why you want to do this, and it can help you to reach physique goals greater than you've ever imagined in quicker time if you start implementing some of the practices these guys used. Now, I'm going to tell you why in this video. Some of the practices will slip into that conversation, but there's plenty of other videos I've made, and also you can find from my friend Golden Era Bookworm, aka Carlos, on YouTube as well, to see the actual practices of implementation of these strategies. But this video is going to just focus on the strategies and what they do, because once you hear them, you're going to understand why they're so effective and why we've lost touch with them, why nobody does these things anymore. So this is going to be a huge edge for you. And watch the rest of the video, and then afterwards watch some of my other videos on Golden Era training, Golden Era Bookworm's other videos on Golden Era training. That's basically your best route to follow through and learn how to do this after watching this one. So, essentially, I've talked about Golden Era bodybuilding plenty of times on my page. This video, though, is going to focus more on the training, okay? So I've talked about the nutrition plenty of times. Golden Era Bookworm and I have collaborated on these things, and we're still collaborating on some of these projects together. But I highly recommend you, go down the rabbit hole of his YouTube page after you're done this one to actually figure out how to implement this. But there's a couple key reasons of why you want to start training like a Golden Era bodybuilder did. Of course, there's plenty of nutritional background, but there's a couple key emphases that these guys had on training. So lots of this training was influenced by Vince Gironda, a couple other key players back in that time, but there's exercises that people don't really do anymore because people thought they were useless. But these exercises would focus on the first thing, expanding the frame, okay? Basically the shape, okay? This is the first emphasis of Golden Era bodybuilding training that nobody really seems to focus on anymore. Of course, people will do, big compound lifts, etc., but there's no emphasis on physically widening the body, physically narrowing the waist, other things like this, okay? So the whole frame theory. And I talk about this in some of my programs, and there's going to be much of this written in future programs I put out. But when we're talking about implementation of this can be achieved through exercises that maybe use rib cage expansion, which is a technique from basically that involves a certain breathing style during certain compound lifts. And there's even a dumbbell pullover, which is very effective at expanding the frame. There's other exercises like from Steve Reeves, who's one of the most famous Golden Era / Silver Era bodybuilders, who had a certain deadlift style where it would expand the shoulder width a little bit. There's other funky techniques like this that even though they're subtle, the devil is in the details, okay? So nobody really does these anymore because they seem too, nitpicky, but in reality, they make a huge difference. If you've ever heard of the 80-20 rule, the Pareto law, you'll know that 80% of the result comes from around 20% of the input. So even these little details do make a massive effect. And in fact, I personally believe that, and I've seen and experienced that in my own training and training of clients and other people I've helped. So when we're getting back to the other reasons, okay? So the first one and most important one is frame, okay? These guys put the emphasis on the frame. Michelangelo would build a sculpture out of whatever shape he already saw the image to, match up to. So essentially, you want to build the outer piece first. If you're a small guy, getting big biceps is not going to look good on you. But if you widen your frame, expand your shoulder width, especially in relation to your waist, biceps, of course, are going to grow in the process of that, but biceps will look way better on a person who has the shape to accommodate it, the frame that fits all the nice little details on there. Okay, so these guys had a very strong emphasis on the aesthetics, even though that's kind of what we talk about more so today. It's these guys who put the primary focus on the aesthetics, the Golden Era bodybuilders. All of their programs were entirely dedicated towards that, and there wasn't even much of the, ego lifting we see nowadays, where guys are just chasing, certain weights to hit with their strength. So essentially there were other elements like high volume. Okay, these guys also had an emphasis on high volume. So if you're familiar with Mike Menser, he was a bodybuilder who did very high volume, high intensity training, and he felt that you had to force the muscle to grow. Now, there's plenty of other documentation on this, especially from Golden Era Bookworm, where you can dive into this deeper. But essentially, a lot of these bodybuilders did have an emphasis on volume training. So there would still be this element of strength, but they would follow it up with very, perhaps even lightweight, high repetition exercises, because this maximizes the breakdown of muscle tissue, which can then maximize the rebuilding of muscle tissue. Okay, there's something I write about, and this is a little thing I'm slipping out here, but I really shouldn't. For all of my training clients, I slip in a section, if they're doing a training-oriented program, where you essentially want to maximize the lactate threshold of a muscle if you're trying to grow. Because power lifters, what they will do is they won't maximize the amount of lactate a muscle can hold. So this lactic acid that builds up when you start pumping a lot. They don't maximize that, but they do maximize a lot of immediate power, okay? But bodybuilder side of things doesn't necessarily require a lot of high strength lifts, but it does require a lot of repetition. So what the repetition does after you've still, satisfied the strength increase requirement of everything is that the repetition will further break down muscle tissue by saturating the muscle with lactic acid, blood. So this lactate threshold is what bodybuilders in many studies have been shown to have higher, ceilings for, okay? Because that's the style of training they do. That's essentially why the muscle has to adapt. Think about this from an adaptive perspective. You essentially want to create a stressor that your body will then have to overcome. And if the stressor you're putting on your body is that you have to get stronger, then yeah, you'll get stronger. But if that stressor is that your muscle physically cannot accommodate a certain amount of lactic acid, of course it's going to expand and have more likely of an expansion by that style of training than simply the strength one. I personally believe there's a marriage of the two, two sides to every coin. But you get the gist. Essentially, you have to maximize that lactic acid lactate threshold. So there's a big emphasis on this from the Golden Era bodybuilders. Now, again, when we're talking about the frame theory, the last thing I'll put out here is we all know there was a huge emphasis on waist tightening. So this ties in with the frame theory, but the last thing I'll throw in is essentially when you look at somebody and you think they have an attractive physique, if it's a man, you think, we instinctively look at a certain thing. If it's a woman, you instinctively look at a certain thing. So when you look at a man and you see, okay, this guy has, a good physique, the trigger in your brain that makes you think that is primarily his shoulder to waist ratio. So maybe a lot of you know this already, but if you follow more Golden Era plans, you can kind of play into this. Now for a woman, it's about more so the hips and waist. There's these other ratios that essentially will indicate either strength, right, relative to his body size, for a man, or fertility, youthfulness, all these other things for women in the way they can accentuate their shape. So essentially this whole frame theory is a man and woman thing. And if you're a woman watching this, plenty of Golden Era female bodybuilders were around. You can look them up. These women, they get so into it and they're very philosophical, which you don't really see nowadays with anybody. So if you're a woman looking to get the edge with your physique as well, I highly recommend looking into them, because I've seen these people spout out the most in-depth, detailed conversations about weight training, right? More detailed than you can get in a video like this, or at least more, spiritual from the conversations these people had. So essentially, look into this. Start training for the frame, right? Expanding your shape. Even isolation exercises, individual muscle groups are not going to look good on a frame that doesn't fit it. You want to emphasize training on what actually indicates to people you have a good physique, if you're training for aesthetic purposes, of course. Obviously, there's a marriage of aesthetic purposes and functional purposes with training. But what you want to do is you want to get the perfect balance of training the frame first and then piling on little details, slapping on some extra pieces of clay, right? So that's it for this video. Go watch my other videos on Golden Era bodybuilding. Go watch other Golden Era bodybuilding training videos, particularly from Golden Era Bookworm. I personally think he has the best ones, and that's why we collaborated in the first place. But that's it for this one. Make sure you subscribe, like, ask me questions if you have any in the comments, and go to my website, romanoketo.com, for keto coaching, group coaching coming out soon, consultations coming out soon, all these other things. Thank you. All my links in the description. Peace.